the problem that happens with the media and with life is that there's both physical and virtual walls. The only things that rise up to go through the physical and virtual worlds are acts of violence and hatred. That's what the media covers. So, and each population starts seeing the other as just representing the worst of each other, because that's what their media portrays, and it creates more and more polarization and a vicious cycle of hatred and separation. And you're seeing that happen in our country today. You're seeing how, unfortunately, social media echo chambers and cable news networks and algorithms, they just feed you what your tribe wants to see, and you end up thinking that all of you guys are right and the other side is wrong, and you end up demonizing one another, and it can lead to horrible stuff.
A recent Pew poll suggested, and it's part of a continuing trend, that since the 1960s, trust in media has been plummeting and is now at its lowest rate. The question of who to trust and what to do is something that is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I'm wondering if this is the point at which kind of the inspiration for the 3 C's and starts with us is born, because obviously tackling the problems with media is a big, broad challenge, and institutions need to reform themselves, and people can have a role in that, but Starts With Us takes a slightly different approach to trying to address these issues.
The reason cable news feed us this stuff is because that's what we want to consume. So we have a huge role and responsibility in trying to demand from social media, mainstream media, and politicians that they represent the 87% of people that want to focus on building a better future for everybody rather than fostering more and more tribal division. Underlying all of that is the Starts With Us movement that Kmele is also a part of. This is our logo. I hope that by the end of today, every one of you guys will join us, because that's what it's going to take. Because what's fascinating about people is that 87% of Americans polled, and I'm sure this is similar across the world, are exhausted with all the polarization and the dehumanization, the hatred, and they want to focus on constructive solutions, and they want a better way. But people with an extremist agenda, the most extremes, they wake up in the morning and they think, how can I advance my very passionate extremist agenda? And the moderates wake up in the morning and they think, what am I going to have for breakfast? We represent an overwhelming majority of people, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, urban, rural, red, blue, conservative, progressive, centrist. The vast majority of people would like constructive engagement, not hatred. We're not wired to hate, but we don't do anything about it. So first and foremost, we need to build an identity and a movement, and then we need to raise our hands and raise our voices and say, we want to focus on problem solving, not just on hatred. The biggest problem that we face is in our daily habits. We as human beings, I'm sure everybody here feels it, because I feel it, and everybody I talk to feels it, the unforgiving judgmentalism that has taken over our society over the last many years. All these things are interrelated, right? They work in an ecosystem together. But we are just so much less forgiving. Every human being is fallible. Every one of us is not perfect. Oh my God, I have 4 children. The world that they're going to inherit, if every little thing they say can be broadcast so exponentially and destroy your life without any sense of humility by all of us that we are perfectly imperfect, that we're all human beings, that we need to just be a little bit more tolerant of one another. And so as we did the research, the 3 buckets of skills we need to develop to counteract that are the 3 C's: curiosity, compassion, and courage. Curiosity towards ideas that we might initially be repelled by. Let's try to understand better where are other people coming from, because we're going to grow from that if we understand those things. It doesn't mean that you're giving up your values. It means that you're working with your mind to do more critical thinking and to question false assumptions and to learn and understand the nuance that exists in all of these ideas. If we apply those 3 C's, we're going to bring back our country and our world back on the right track.
I'd say that the guiding ethos of today's politics appears to be a kind of negative partisanship. Like whether or not you know what you're for and why, you definitely know who you hate, who you fear, and what they may do to you if they gain control. Most of the political messaging tends to lean into the culture wars that are going on in society. There's a great deal of demonization, and I think you're right. There is a genuine deficit of compassion and courage, and these are habits that we can either reinforce and reward with our attention and our time, or we can try to train ourselves to be somewhat different when responding to these things. We have this belief that there is nothing that we have in common with the people that we have the most severe disagreements with. But there does appear to be a great deal of data that suggests that simply is not the case.
Both the left and the right care about freedom and democracy. Across the spectrum, all Americans care about celebrating and respecting one another and respecting our differences. In conservative parlance, it's individualism. In progressive parlance, it's respecting each other's identities. But fundamentally, there's so much more common ground in principles. And to your point, Kmele, if we can put up the first slide, even on core issues that you would think that we're completely divided on, there's enormous hidden common ground. This particular example comes from one of Starts With Us partners called Beyond Conflict, that did this amazing work. There's enormous amount of hidden consensus, but it's hidden because everybody assumes that the other side is much more extremist than they are. So let's say on immigration, the bottom slide shows you what our perceptions is. The perceptions of the polarization of how far apart Democrats and Republicans are, because the media tends to focus on the most extreme positions, so we think that that's representative. But in fact, if you ask the people, there's so much hidden common ground on immigration for how to resolve the issue. That's the upper slide on immigration. When you actually look at sensible solutions, 70 to 80% of Americans agree on 70 to 80% on all of those issues. And the problem is that we keep being manipulated into thinking by the most extremist politicians who get broadcast by the most extremist positions that get broadcast on the media and social media, that there's no constructive solutions out there. And nothing could be further from the truth. And there are very real repercussions to this. We, as a result, are, for the first time in history, finding far, far less common ground in people working across the aisle than before. Disagreement in and of itself is not the enemy. I mean, at Kind, I think one of the reasons why we succeeded enormously and we continue to do really well is because we created a culture where people were encouraged to debate ideas and to really, really struggle with ideas till they would come up with the right answers. And I think for society all the more so, right? You do need to create, what makes America so amazing is this marketplace of ideas. And as someone who was born in Mexico, where back when I was living in Mexico, if you criticized the president, you could end up in jail, and who understands that freedom and democracy are incredible gifts that we have in America that we cannot take for granted, I definitely believe that we need to, more than not, encourage free media and be very comfortable with having hardy debates. Nobody that starts with us is trying to say, let's not debate, let's just get along and do kumbaya. That would be the death of our innovation culture and everything. We want to encourage people to learn how to disagree better, to learn how to debate each other and not think that just because they disagree, the other person's evil, which is what the last 5 or 10 years have somehow made some people assume. And so the first thing is, I would like to overcome polarization, but first and foremost, I want to overcome dehumanization and help Americans and global citizens understand how to disagree better and how to learn from people that are different from them. Most important, we as citizens need to learn how to exercise the 3 C's, including the aspect of curiosity that includes critical thinking and critical listening. We need to question everything critically. We need to question our own side even more than the other side, because otherwise we're going to then just take the mantra from our side if it's a cult or a religion. So if you're a Republican, you should question your Republican leaders and ask whether what they're telling you is correct. If you're a Democrat, you should do the same. It's very unhealthy to think that your side doesn't make mistakes. That's what makes your side stagnate and become bad. The group that will thrive the most is the group that encourages most disagreement among themselves, because then the better ideas will come forward. I do this all the time, and I get stronger for doing it. Like, I listen to the other side, and I understand them better, and then if my objective is to convince them, it's going to be hard to convince anybody in these times, but you have a slightly better chance if you understand where they're coming from. You're certainly going to grow more from understanding how the other side thinks. It doesn't mean that you're giving up your values or that you're continuing. It just means you're growing. And maybe you're wrong. Sometimes we're wrong, so we need to be open to listen. Most times, you're just at least going to better understand where the other side comes from, and you're probably going to create more value for yourself and others if you practice that curiosity. Your voice needs to count. You need to, in your conversations with your family and friends, in your communications with others, in how you consume media, in how you spend those 5 minutes of extra time, you have a tremendous role to play. Even a tiny little thing you do, because we are hundreds of millions of people representing this. We are the 87%.